Here's a question that ought to stop you cold. What if the most successful small car of the 20th century, the one that sold over 8 million units, served farmers, presidents, a pope, and entire armies, is barely mentioned today, while a rival that sold nearly 3 million fewer units became one of the most recognized automobiles in automotive history? That's not a riddle. That's the story of the Renault 4 and the Morris Mini. And if you've been around cars long enough, if you've turned a spanner on one, driven one through a December morning with no heater worth speaking of, or simply watched them rust quietly in a field somewhere in Normandy, you already know both of these machines deserve a proper conversation. Let's set the scene. It's 1961. Europe is rebuilding. The war has been over for 16 years, but the memory of austerity runs deep, especially in France. Ordinary families are moving from bicycles to mopeds, from mopeds to small cars. Roads are improving, but slowly. The countryside is still very much the countryside: rutted tracks, farm gates, muddy lanes. Into this world, Renault introduces something that looks almost apologetically simple. 4 wheels, a roof, a door at the back, a gear lever sprouting from the dashboard like a broom handle. No pretension whatsoever. 2 years earlier, across the channel, Alec Isagonis had unveiled the Mini, and Britain had already fallen slightly in love with it. By 1961, the Mini was finding its feet in motorsport, in London's narrow streets, and in the imaginations of a generation that was about to become very loud indeed. Same basic idea, same approximate price bracket, same target: the ordinary working person who needed to get somewhere. And yet, 60 years on, one of these cars is immortal, and the other is quietly, almost unfairly, forgotten. Why? That's what we're going to work through today, because the answer says as much about culture and timing and geography as it does about the cars themselves. Section 1. The Renault 4, what it actually was. Let's be precise about what Renault built, because vagueness doesn't serve anyone here. The Renault 4, known in France as the Quatre, or simply the Quatre L, went on sale in August of 1961. It was designed under Fernand Picard, and Renault's brief was unambiguous: build a car for rural France, not for Paris, for the paysan. For the farmer who needed to haul chickens to market and get the children to school on the same trip. For the village doctor who needed to reach patients down lanes that would defeat almost anything else. The engineering decisions that followed from that brief were remarkable. The Renault 4 was front-wheel drive from day one, unusual enough for a budget car in 1961. It used torsion bar suspension all round, giving it a long, supple ride that could absorb punishment a conventional spring system simply couldn't manage. And here's a detail that engineers still find fascinating. The Renault 4's rear torsion bars were different lengths on each side. The left measured 2,400 millimeters, and the right measured 2,450 millimeters. This produced an asymmetric wheelbase. The left rear wheel sat further back than the right. It sounds like a manufacturing error. It wasn't. It was a deliberate packaging decision to accommodate the gearbox and final drive layout. Mechanics who discovered this for the first time often thought they'd found a wreck that had been in a serious shunt. The original engine was a 747 cubic centimeter unit producing 26 horsepower, modest by any measure, but adequate for what the car was designed to do. Later came an 845 cubic centimeter version, producing around 34 horsepower, and eventually, in 1978, the GTL variant arrived with a 1,108 cubic centimeter engine, still 34 horsepower, but with considerably more torque and flexibility at low speeds, which is exactly what the car needed. The gearbox was a 3-speed unit, operated by that distinctive dashboard-mounted lever: no center console, no fuss, pull it, push it, find your gear, carry on. Top speed of the original was roughly 80 kilometers per hour, around 50 miles per hour, and nobody buying a Renault 4 in 1961 thought that was a problem. It was never a car for the motorway. It was a car for life. The original French list price in 1961 was 3,990 new francs. In Britain, where it arrived in the same year, the price was approximately £532. That placed it within £20 or £30 of a basic Mini, which is close enough to call them genuine rivals. Section 2. The Mini. The same problem. A very different solution. Alec Isigonis designed the Mini in response to the Suez Crisis of 1956, which had triggered petrol rationing in Britain and exposed the vulnerability of large, thirsty cars. BMC's brief was to produce something genuinely small and economical, and Isigonis achieved it through two engineering strokes that changed the industry permanently. First, he mounted the engine transversely sideways across the engine bay. Second, he drove the front wheels. These decisions, combined with 10-inch wheels pushed to each corner of the car, created an interior space that seemed physically impossible, given the exterior dimensions. You could sit 4 adults in a box that measured 10 feet from bumper to bumper. That was the achievement. The engine was BMC's existing A-series unit, displacing 848 cubic centimeters and producing 34 horsepower. The original UK price, when it went on sale in August of 1959, was £496, 19 shillings and 2 pence, a figure BMC's management considered dangerously low, because it almost certainly was. The car was reportedly sold at or near a loss in its early years, which explains why the company spent years trying to quietly raise the price without alarming buyers. Now here's what matters. In strictly engineering terms, these two cars are solving the same problem with similar answers. Front-wheel drive, small engine, compact dimensions, practical interior, affordable price. Road and Track was testing small European cars throughout this period, and by 1962 it was clear to any observer that a genuine class of practical small cars had arrived. The Renault 4 sold more of them, 8,135,424 units, by the time production ended in December of 1992. The Mini, in its original form from 1959 to 2000, reached approximately 5,387,000. The gap is nearly 2,750,000 cars. By any commercial measure, the Renault 4 was the more successful vehicle. So the question isn't whether it outsold the Mini. The question is why that success never translated into cultural permanence. Section 3. The decade that made the Mini immortal. To understand why the Mini won the image war, you have to understand what Britain was doing between 1963 and 1969. Because that period, what journalists at the time were already calling the swinging 60s, created a cultural environment that essentially handed the Mini a golden ticket. The Mini appeared in films. It appeared on fashion shoots. It appeared in the garage of every pop musician, model, and actor who wanted to demonstrate that they were too clever and too hip to drive something large and conventional. John Lennon drove one. Twiggy was photographed with one. The car was small, irreverent, witty qualities that resonated perfectly with a generation that was actively rejecting the formality of their parents' world. And then there was motorsport. In 1964, a Mini Cooper S driven by Paddy Hopkirk and Henry Liddon won the Monte Carlo Rally outright. Not a class win, an outright victory. A tiny British saloon car beating the works entries from much larger, better-funded operations. The British press exploded with enthusiasm. In 1965, the feat was repeated, this time with Timo Mäkinen behind the wheel. And again in 1967, with Rauno Aaltonen. 3 Monte Carlo victories in 4 years is a record that does not need embellishment. The Cooper S was the car responsible, running a 1,275 cubic centimeter version of the A-series engine, producing around 76 horsepower in standard tune, though competition versions ran considerably more. This was a genuine racing car that shared its basic identity with the shopping vehicle your wife drove on a Tuesday. That combination of everyday usability and outright competition success is extraordinarily difficult to manufacture, and BMC had it without really trying. Then came 1969, and the film that sealed everything, The Italian Job. Three red, white and blue Mini Cooper S models escaping through Turin's sewers, rooftops and stairwells, while Michael Caine delivered lines that a generation of British men have never quite forgotten. The Renault 4 appeared in no such film. It starred in the daily life of 30 million French citizens, which is a different kind of fame, entirely deep, affectionate, essential, and almost completely invisible to the outside world. Section 4. What the Renault 4 meant in practice. Here's the part that rarely gets discussed in retrospectives, because it doesn't photograph well. The Renault 4 was used by the French gendarmerie. It served as a light military vehicle. The French postal service, La Poste, ran enormous fleets of them. Médecins Sans Frontières used them in the field. The car worked in South America, Africa, Yugoslavia, Spain, and Ireland. It was assembled under license in multiple countries, including Argentina, Colombia, and South Africa, because it was exactly what those markets needed, something robust, repairable, and utterly indifferent to roads that would destroy more sophisticated machinery. Pope John Paul II used a Renault 4 during his earlier years as a priest in Poland, a fact Renault was understandably pleased to mention in later years. It was a car associated with service, with practicality, with getting on with things. None of that lends itself to poster art. None of that generates the kind of mythology that racing victories and film appearances create. The Renault 4 did its job with extraordinary competence and asked for remarkably little in return. In France, it was beloved. The Quattro occupies a place in French affection, roughly comparable to the Mini's place in Britain, possibly stronger. A 1992 survey of French motorists found that the Renault 4 ranked among the most fondly remembered cars in the country's automotive history. But France is not Britain, and the 1960s cultural revolution that made the Mini immortal was, at its core, an English-speaking phenomenon. It was exported to America and Australia and Canada through music and film and fashion in a way that French rural practicality simply couldn't match. The Renault 4 was a magnificent answer to a real question. The Mini was a magnificent answer to the same question, and it happened to be photographed asking it in front of Carnaby Street. Section 5. The numbers that should change the conversation. Let's bring this back to specifics, because the numbers are extraordinary. 31 years of continuous production, 1961 to 1992. In that time, Renault made no fundamental change to the car's architecture. The torsion bar suspension was there on the last car built as it was on the first. The body structure remained recognizable throughout. The gear lever stayed in the dashboard. These are not signs of neglect, they are signs of a design so well conceived that there was no compelling reason to alter it. The GTL of 1978 is worth a moment's attention. With the 1,108 cubic centimeter engine, it would reach around 132 kilometers per hour, just over 80 miles per hour. Fuel consumption was exceptional. Routine servicing was within the capability of any competent amateur with a basic toolkit. Replacement parts were cheap and widely available, because the car hadn't changed substantially in nearly 2 decades. Values today reflect the car's curious position in history. A well-presented, usable Renault 4 GTL in Britain or France typically sells for between £3,000 and £8,000, depending on condition and provenance. Rare clan or rodeo variants, Renault's early attempt at a leisure vehicle based on the 4's platform reach higher figures. Compare that with a genuinely good Morris Mini Cooper S, which will comfortably exceed £40,000 at auction, and you begin to see the gap that culture creates. The Renault 4 should, by any rational measure, be as sought after as the Mini. It is rarer, in well-preserved form, because it was driven until it died by people who depended on it. Its engineering is arguably more innovative for its context. Its production span is longer. Its global reach is wider. Section 6. Why this question still matters. If you're of an age to have driven either of these cars in period, or if you grew up watching them navigate the roads of your town or village, you understand that they represent two completely different philosophies of what a small, affordable car is supposed to be. The Mini said, "Here is something clever, something fun, Something that will embarrass larger cars on a winding road and make you feel rather good about yourself. The Renault 4 said, "Here is something honest, something dependable, something that will carry your children and your tools and your dog without complaint and still be running 20 years from now." Both statements were true. Both cars delivered on their promises. The cultural machinery of the 1960s simply amplified one of them in a way that was never repeated for the other. There's an argument, and a serious one, that the Renault 4 is the more important car in terms of what it actually did for actual people. In developing countries where roads were poor and mechanics were local and parts had to be available, the Renault 4 was the difference between a family having reliable transport and not having it. That's not a small thing. That's a car that genuinely changed lives, quietly and without fanfare, across 3 decades and on multiple continents. So where does that leave us? The Mini is an icon. It deserves to be. The Cooper S victories, the Italian job, the swinging 60s, all of it earned fair and square. Nobody is taking that away from a car that genuinely captured a cultural moment and held it for 60 years. But the Renault 4 outsold it by nearly 3 million units. It served longer, it worked harder, it went places. The Mini never went, and did things the Mini was never asked to do. And the vast majority of people who could tell you everything about the Monte Carlo rally have never heard of Fernand Picard, or the asymmetric torsion bars, or the dashboard gear lever, or the 3,990 francs it cost to buy one in 1961. History remembers what gets photographed. It remembers what gets filmed. It remembers what gets associated with glamour and speed and celebrity. The Renault 4 had none of those things. It had something rarer and less photogenic, genuine usefulness to ordinary people over an extraordinary length of time. If you ever had one, if you owned a Quattrelle, or remember a family member who did, I'd genuinely like to hear about it. Leave a comment below. Tell me what yours was, what color it was, what roads you drove it on. These cars deserve to be remembered by the people who actually knew them. If you found this worth your time, a like and a subscription help this channel reach people who care about the same stories. There are plenty more where this one came from. Cars and moments and engineering decisions that deserve a better hearing than history has given them. Thank you for watching. You know these cars. That's exactly why this conversation matters.